Welcome everyone to this webinar on Germany and the legislation and on VIDA, and of course the solution that Storecove then offers. First, I want to explain a few organizational things. That's this tool, Demio. It has, which you can see to the right, the possibility to download the handouts. So in there is the German fact sheet and this presentation. You can also ask your questions via chat. And Bianca, Nikki, and me will try and answer your questions during the session and during the chat. So, oh, I see the chat now and I see a lot of hello, everyone. So thank you for that. Of course, I'm very honored and pleased that Bianca wants to join us. We met in Berlin, where she gave a presentation for a large audience, and I thought it was impressive, and we were able to learn a lot from that. Bianca is a tax lawyer, she's lecturer, she's specialist, and she also is member of the CN 434 Commission, which sets the standards, technical standards for e-invoicing. So a lot of knowledge with Bianca, and Bianca will take the first part of the presentation and I will take the second part. So Bianca, happy to leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm happy to be here with you today. I will give you an overview on the German legislation and VIDA today, which VIDA has passed ECOFIN on November 5th, 2024, so just a few days ago. And for VIDA, there are just a few more steps to take, but at the moment, it seems like we have a final agreement on VIDA, and VIDA is finally ready to go. So with my presentation today, I would like to give you not only an overview on the legislation of both the German and the European, the VIDA package, but to put it in the context of what can be strategic consequences when it comes to choosing e-invoicing software resulting from both packages. So let's start off with the German legislation package. Can everyone see those slides I'm now presenting, Dolph? Great. Let's start off with the German legislation package. It's called the Growth Opportunities Act. And this simplified illustration shows in a first step the introduction of the receiving obligation by 1st of January 2025 for CEN-norm invoices. What are CEN-norm invoices? Well, they are electronic invoices according to the two syntaxes, UBL and CII, and which are then translated to formats such as Peppol UBL, X-Rechnung, or Fakturix. In a next step, then, by 1st of January 2027, companies with a previous year's turnover of more than 800,000 euros are not allowed to send paper and PDF invoices anymore, but are obliged to send electronic invoices according to the CEN-norm or other electronic interoperable formats. For companies with a previous year's turnover of less than 800,000, they have a 1-year grace period, and their sending obligation starts by 1st of January 2028. And in the last draft of the German Annual Tax Act, small business owners, and this is very, very new, are presumably going to be exempt from the sending obligation. And it looks like for the moment that this law will be passed accordingly. In a second step, and this is what you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, it is clearly stated in the latest letter of the Ministry of Finance from October that a transactional tax reporting is going to be implemented for domestic German transactions by 1st of January 2028 at the earliest, and that this will be based, in fact, on platforms. So the current transmission way of emails, which is one of the permitted ways to transmit invoices, which is allowed at the moment and will be by 2025, this will come to an end sooner or later when transactional tax reporting is going to be introduced for German transactions. So with this overview, I would like to now delve into strategic issues that arise in particular in connection with VIDA and also address some key aspects of VIDA. I have therefore identified 5 main topics which play a crucial role in terms of e-invoicing both on a domestic German level, but also on a VIDA cross-border level entering into force by, presumably, as it seems, at least for the time being, by July 2030. So what is the first crucial topic? And I believe the audience cannot see the animation right now, but I will switch to this slide. So what is the first crucial topic? It's invoicing deadlines. In Germany, the issuer of the invoice has up to 6 months' time to issue the invoice, whereas on a cross-border VIDA level by July 2030, the current deadline of up to 45 days for issuing an invoice will diminish to 10 days. So in the future, the invoice issuer must have a close look here as to whether it is a domestic or a cross-border transaction. The second topic, and this is very crucial, is transmission ways. Neither Germany nor VIDA have regulated the transmission way, and Germany has somehow regulated the transmission via email, that it is still allowed for the time being in Germany. However, when it comes to Germany, rumor has it that there will be implemented private or maybe even a state platform. So in this context, I would like to now show you what I mean by that and what a potential platform solution would look like. And for this, I'm jumping back to this slide. It has become clear now that electronic invoices in the future won't amount to PDF, but rather to XML invoices based mostly on the SEN norm. But how do you make sure to transmit structured data in a safe way? Of course, you could always issue invoices in a structured format and then transmit them via email, which is the example on the bottom left corner. Or you could use existing rail connections, as I call it, that can be reached via access points and make sure that your structured data is being transmitted in a very safe way. So in Europe, the most famous rail connection in terms of e-invoicing is Peppol, which makes sure to send and receive not only e-invoices, but also other business documents in a safe way. Germany has now announced that in a second step, whenever this will be, they will install some kind of rail connection or network. Moving on to topic number 3 of my list, the permitted invoicing formats or syntaxes. Germany has regulated that invoices according to the European standard, the SEN norm, and other interoperable formats like EDIFACT are in fact permitted for domestic transactions. However, in cross-border cases, and this is on the right-hand side, VIDA only permits invoices according to the SEN norm. So again, businesses will have to distinguish, even in terms of invoicing formats in the future, whether they can use certain kind of formats. And in this example, this would be, for example, EDIFACT invoices. What is now an example of a format according to the so-called SEN norm, the EN 6931? Well, I've brought you a so-called hybrid format, which is Zugpferd, or the French translation Facturix. It is a PDF file which contains a structured data set as XML, so it's human readable. You can see it on the right-hand side, the visualization, and on the bottom right corner, you see the XML version, which is the syntax. A letter from the German Ministry of Finance from October 2024, so very recent letter, states that those hybrid formats are going to be legally permitted, and the VIDA package does so as well. So those hybrid formats are allowed under VIDA and the German legislation for the time being. And lastly, let's move on to reporting obligations. On the one hand, there is the supplier reporting, which is currently not planned from a German legal point of view. However, it is already announced for a later point in time, and it will have to be based on the SEN norm. For cross-border transactions, it's already clear that immediately after the invoice is being issued, the supplier will have to report the transaction based on the EN. This is what VIDA is clearly stating. And then Lastly, also the acquirer will have to report cross-border transactions according to VIDA, but each and every member state can decide or has the possibility to opt out of this reporting obligation in general for all acquirers for cross-border transactions. So we'll have to see how this turns out in the future and how each and every member state is going to decide whether they will introduce this acquirer reporting or not. For German transactions, rumor has it that such reporting obligation for acquirer reporting is not foreseeable in the near future and not planned. So in a nutshell, what does this mean for multinational companies? Well, I'd say that from a strategic perspective, there are a few effects that need to be taken into account when choosing a software for multinational enterprises. Of course, in an initial step, it would have to be very clear internally who is responsible and has the required expertise when it comes to choosing software. Is it the tax department? Is it the accounting department or the IT department? Who is going to drive the project? Who is the one responsible? Who is the one in the driver's seat? And then in the next step, and I think this is quite obvious in the meantime, but an Excel invoices, they will have to be replaced by an invoicing software. But the question is, how do multinational companies who want to have a standardized software landscape across countries are going to make this decision? Well, either they focus for the moment only on the German side of the legislation and decide that for the time being, they continue with existing business partners to continue to use EDI. With new business partners, however, they can switch to Zugpferd, which is the hybrid invoicing format. And this is the blue scenario, or in this case, the white scenario. In this scenario, their invoicing could be handled via standard software and to check whether their standard software has the Zugpferd functionality in there already. Also, in this scenario, they will be able to continue with in-house formats as long as they are interoperable with the standard software. However, multinational companies who want to set a strategy which is future-proof in terms of VIDA and already considering the reporting obligations which are going to come and going to be introduced by July 2030 under VIDA, or for companies in the white scenario who decide that this approach is too expensive or too slow, they will have to make sure that they will not only be able to receive, but also to send invoices covering also the tax reporting obligations that they then will face, and make sure that this can be handled via Peppol access point, which I've shown you earlier, the rail connection. Because this Peppol access point can be handled by the companies, or this Peppol access point can be handled by the companies themselves or via a service provider. What is the benefit of this approach? It is that Peppol would work cross-border in terms of reaching not only various business partners, but also tax authorities in various countries. So there is a huge benefit to Peppol. And I know this is at the end of my presentation, and I know this has been quite a lot of information for Friday afternoon. I've tried to cover the most important topics of both legislation packages, so you're hopefully all set to have or to think about a strategy.
Thank you very much, Bianca. There were a lot of questions in the chat. I tried to answer a few of those. The last one was also on the version of Zugpferd. Maybe I may ask you to just read through the chat, and maybe you can be more precise or answer a few of these questions. According to your knowledge.
Yes,
would be great.
Yes, of course. The last comment I see is correct. Only the newer versions of Zugpferd fulfill the new German law. That is correct.
Fantastic. Okay. If you have better answers than I did in the chat to other questions, add that too.
Mhm.
Then yeah, thank you so much for this clear presentation. I would like to take over from here and, of course, tell a bit more about the solution that Storecove offers. We are a service provider based in the Netherlands, so headquartered in the Netherlands, and we have offices in Japan, in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and in New York. And I hope I can click through the slides. Yes, I can, like you did, Bianca. So this works quite well. So what you see here is be ready for the wave of the mandates. And of course, Germany does not really have a mandate. We always call it half of a mandate. But you see that a lot of companies really are serious around what do we need to do and what do we need to be ready for. So yeah, the new rules have more impact than we expected, and that's why it's good to yeah, to be able to discuss this also with Bianca with all her knowledge. I want to tell you about the forces that drive e-invoicing in general. And so on the one hand, it's the mandates, it's the CTC, so continuous transaction control, tax authorities that want companies to send invoices via the tax authority, or at least that want to certify the invoices before they get sent. The goal of CTC being, of course, closing the tax gap and making sure that not too much tax will be lost in whichever gray area that would be. So that's also why, for instance, South American countries started early with this. For instance, Italy started early with CTC. But now throughout Europe, you see that more countries are introducing CTC or are preparing for CTC, so reporting to the tax authority. And the VIDA guideline, which Bianca described, is trying to harmonize this CTC reporting mainly. The other thing driving e-invoicing adoption is B2B mandates. Like, for instance, in Belgium, as of 2026, all companies in Belgium need to send and receive via the Peppol network. So there it's really the infrastructure that's stipulated, and B2B invoicing should be via the network. And of course, also driving network adoption. And at the bottom of this slide, you see business logic of efficiency, speed, and safety, which is actually the state of technology that brings that at this moment in time, it's logical to start with e-invoicing because it's there, it's available for everyone, and it's safe and quick and encrypted. So that's the logic of this moment in time, why a lot of countries at sort of the same moment start with their e-invoicing. And you see here, we have the Peppol network, which is mostly available in Europe and in Asia. And we have the DBNA network, which is the US network, mainly focuses on businesses within North America. Here you see the two networks, and actually the way they are set up. They are four-corner models, and they look a lot the same. So in the middle, you see the network, and the network has, just like a telephone network, providers. Here they are called access points or service providers. So when you, as a company, want to connect to a network, you need to connect to a service provider. And mostly this connection is sort of API based, which I will talk a bit about later. And also when you're a receiver, you need to connect to a service provider who will take care of the transport over the Open Exchange network. The relevant thing about these Open Exchange network is that they have auto discovery, meaning that when you send an invoice and in that invoice you add the identifier of the company, VAT number you want to send to, or for instance, a fallback email address, based on that on that identifier, VAT number, you can ask the network, is this company present on the network? And if so, the sending access point can also ask, what format does the receiver need? And this is a really important thing. Because of this auto discovery, you can find your counterpart on the network, and you can produce the specific format that the receiver wants. And that is something that Storecove does. We automatically generate globally the format that the receiver wants to receive, and they can automatically process. Being a big advantage in compared to old EDI, where it was protocols one-to-one, one format that you agreed on, or for instance, access points that say, okay, you need to ingest all the different formats to all the different countries you want to send to. So this, auto discovery is really relevant to understand from open exchange networks that it brings that you can search for every company in the world. For instance, in Japan, you ask based on the identifier, is it present? Then the receiving access point answers, yes, it's here. And it will tell you what format they would need. And then Japan, it would be JP Pint, but in Germany, it would be X-Rechnung. And so all these countries can have their own local, commonly used formats, and you can send and receive over these open exchange networks. Here you see the mandate timeline, Bianca discussed. So relevant for now, of course, at January 2025, that companies in Germany need to be able to receive. I was just talking to a German integrator who joked, actually having an email address is enough. Sort of. I mean, you need to be able to receive electronic invoice formats. And the electronic invoice formats, as you heard, can be the Zugwert format via email. It can also be old Edifact if someone wants to send that via email, which is not logical. But it can also be X-Rechnung. And X-Rechnung is the format that is being used on the Peppol network in Germany. So we think, of course, as a Peppol service provider, but we think this is the future. Also, the Peppol network will be the future in Germany. And so if you really want to be ready, it would be good to connect to the Peppol network, because once you connect to such a network as a receiver, you implicitly say to the whole network, I'm here, I'm connected with my, for instance, VAT number. And I want as many of my suppliers to deliver e-invoices so that I can process them immediately. And for the receiver, that means an enormous advantage, because an electronic invoice can be processed within a few seconds, of course, after authorization. But this brings that, a lot of work that you had to do on the receiving side is now, not necessary anymore, because you receive the data and your financial system or your ERP system can immediately process that data. So I told you about so the USP specifically that Storecove has. We are able to listen to the other side no matter where they're situated. US, we generate UBL 2.3. Germany, we generate Zugwert or X-Rechnung. And when we send to Malaysia, we generate MY Pint. And so that's a big thing. On the receiving side, we do the same. So no matter what invoice comes in, we always generate the same data set from that. And that is why we call the connection that we offer a RESTful JSON connection. No matter which e-invoice format comes in, we always build the same JSON set from that, meaning that the technology partners or your developers or your integrators, they only have to connect once to the API with JSON data. And then with that same API connection, you're ready for whichever format and for whichever tax authority will start with CTC in the future. Here you see the sending explained. So specifically in Germany, once your financial system is connected to the ERP, the JSON API, we deliver the invoice in the format needed, X-Rechnung with Peppol, and X-Rechnung in Germany being UBL and CII. One other thing important to note is here we're talking mainly about larger companies that want to connect for e-invoicing, but a lot of accountancy systems, also in Germany, already support Peppol. So for smaller companies and medium-sized companies, many of those can register on the Peppol network within their own accountancy software. So they don't need complex connections to financial systems or ERP systems. They can just activate Peppol within their own accountancy system. And here you see as a second note, if the recipient is not on the Peppol network, we create that Zugwert format. That being the format that you can then read as sorry, my television switched off, but you receive the Zugwert format via email. And if you are using a service provider that is able to unpack that Zugwert and take the XML out and put that in the same API endpoint, then you're also ready for Zugwert format. And that's what we do. And so we make sure that no matter what you're receiving, Peppol, X-Rechnung, we put that in the API. And if it's the zoekveert via an email address, we unpack the zoekveert, take the electronic document out of that, and place that in the API. So in both channels, you'll receive the documents in the same direction. And here the note says Certinia has a pre-developed connection with Storecove. I think in Germany, there's also a company called Lobster that has predefined APIs. So Lobster users can, without too much development, connect to our API. And we just discussed a company in the US, APCore, having the same predefined API connections. Here you see the sending. So in this infographic, hey, your ERP system is connected to the Storecove API. We send the sales invoice via an open exchange network, could be Peppol. If we can't reach the identifier on Peppol, we check the DBNA network. If it's there, we send it to the US company in UBL 2.3 format, that is. In the meantime, if your company is based in an entity, your entity is based in a company where you need to do tax reporting, we send it to the tax authority, certify the invoice, and only after it has been certified, we send it via the network. And for instance, France, upcoming with their PDPs, certified service providers that can report to the tax authority, most likely will have a combination of Peppol and CTC. So France is a really interesting country in that perspective. And the last part you see here is the email, which we discussed. We can send zoekveert, but also ex-rechnung via email, which we call to the fallback email address. So if we can't deliver via an open exchange network, alternatively, we will deliver via email. And by doing so, we make sure that you can always deliver the invoice. And if one of your customers signs up to Peppol in the future, that means one less will be sent via email. So this working is a sort of a transition model between the two. To the left, you see archiving API. What that means is you heard we automatically generate the format that the receiver wants to receive to be able to process it. But we also offer the option to, via the archiving API, retrieve the format in which the invoice was officially delivered so that you can store it in your own ERP. A lot of countries have archiving mandates. You need to archive for, let's say, 3, 7, 10 years. And via this archiving API, you can retrieve the invoice format as it was officially delivered in. Something about receiving, I already explained. You sign up to an open exchange network, and from that moment on, implicitly, you tell the whole network, I want to receive as many invoices as possible. So you don't need to be in connection with your counterpart, your supplier here. The connection between the two is made automatically based on the identifier. And that's a big advantage. The identifiers in Germany being VAT number, and for government Lightweight ID. So if you start with e-invoicing and in your customer card you collect these numbers, you're good to go and start send and receive via the open exchange network. And zoekveert, of course, I explained, you can have an email address which then your customer sends the zoekveert to. We unpack it, take the XML out of it, and translate that into JSON, which brings that your financial package can immediately process that zoekveert format. Again, a note on the bottom: registered as receiver is unique, and this is important to understand. Service providers in the US, but also in Europe, need to register receiving companies in an SML, which is a sort of a registry, a database, which sort of reroutes to the specific, that's then called SMP, Service Metadata Publisher, which tells you what format is needed. But to be able to do this rerouting via the SML, we as service providers need to register you once in that SML, and that's unique. That means that you can only do this in one financial software solution. So as a company, you need to decide which financial solution is my endpoint. That could be an accountancy package, but that could also be your OCR engine. But it's important to understand that you can't have more endpoints because you only have one entity to register a VAT number, and you can only do that once. On the sending side, that's different. Sending you can do from different locations or financial solutions. So that's the working of the exchange networks. And therefore, you can have a directory on the receiving side. Peppol has a directory, but to be clear, that Peppol directory is incomplete. And so you best ask your customer directly for their identifier when you want to be 100% sure if you're sending an invoice to the identifier that is connected to the administration of that specific customer. So to be precise, ask your customer for the specific details. The same as you would do when you would transfer money to a bank account. You would also feel safer when you ask for the bank account first. Here you see the receiving flow. So actually the same flow. So you're receiving from an open exchange network, or you're receiving from a tax authority or via email. Via our API, we will translate that to JSON data, and the JSON data will end up in the ERP system. And here again, you see archiving. And on the receiving side, archiving means that you can retrieve the invoice like it was originally sent. Because you need to store, according to the tax authority, the invoice in the format that it was originally sent in. And that's what the archiving API on the receiving side takes care of. So in total, what do you have when you connect to an API and when you connect, let's say, for the future? On the one hand, you can receive Zugveert, the hybrid email format. You can receive via Peppol the Ex-Rechnung format, UBL and CII. I added Finvoice here to give you an example, like it's not only for Germany, but it's for the whole world that you're connecting. So if via the same API you want to connect to the Finnish network called Finvoice, that's also possible. But that network is outside Peppol. That's sort of an outdated network. But I think about around 90% of the Finnish companies is still on that network. So it's important that your API connection connects to more networks than just Peppol and DBNA. But the advantage of connecting to open exchange networks, of course, is that you can immediately start with your transactions over the whole world, and you can send invoices over the whole world. You can send orders via those networks, and even more and more documents are prepared, like advanced shipping notes. In the US, there are remittance advices that can be transported, all around faster delivery, encryption, secure delivery. So the advantage that brings. As I explained, via the same API connection, you're VIDA ready. And here we added a few countries that we connect to, being Malaysia, Singapore, India, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Poland, sorry, that was first, and Romania. So again, via the same API connection, you can do your compliant reporting, but to be able to do compliant reporting to a tax authority, you also need to register with the tax authority first as an entity. And so the tax authorities at this moment in time are not reachable via Peppol. Peppol is preparing for that, though. That would then be a 5-corner model. And I think in the pilot that's running at the moment, around 10 countries are working on this pilot of being able to, via the Open Exchange Network Peppol, also do your reporting to tax authorities. So Peppol will be very useful in that in the near future. To the left on this slide, there's something which is quite new, but which is quite special for Germany, because that is a model called Enhanced Peppol B2B Domain, a model where a Zugveert format or other formats can be wrapped as a format and can also be sent over the Peppol network. So at this moment in time, Zugveert is an email format, hybrid format, especially for email. But this enhanced Peppol B2B domain makes sure that in the near future, you can also send a Zugveert over the Peppol network. So you just keep the format as it is, you wrap it, you send it in an envelope, and then it ends up with the receiver. The only thing is that the receiver, meaning the receiving access point, should be able to unpack that zoekveert and take the XML out of it. So this is a big thing for Germany, because now zoekveert can only be sent via email, but in the near future, you can also send it via Peppol. And if you use a service provider that supports unpacking zoekveert, like for instance Storecove does, this is a really practical way, because in that sense, you can reach more of your suppliers as long as they're on the Peppol network and as long as they're able to reach your zoekveert. And this is possible because zoekveert is a standard. Because it's standardized, you can send invoices to more receivers. When it's not standardized, like for instance Edifact, then you still have to agree between sender and receiver on the format that you want to deliver. So that's more difficult. So B2B enhanced domain, especially for zoekveert, interesting. And then we say, due to the Storecove automatic format conversion, you're ready for the VIDA, the upcoming VIDA guidelines. Yes, you are, in a sense that if Germany would start with text reporting, you would be ready, because we automatically generate the specific format also for Germany. And still, of course, as a company, first you need to register with the tax authority to be able to do the compliant reporting to the tax authority. But technically, with that one API connection, you're ready. I think that's already the last slide. So I'll tell you, on the website there are a few earlier webinars which were on other countries. For instance, on Malaysia is on there, Germany is on there, and many other webinars will be on there. As said, the handouts, and that's the German fact sheet, and on the other hand, this presentation will be sent to you. I think a lot of questions have been asked in the chat in the meantime. So, Adolf Kars, does this mean we cannot use the Storecove API to send zoekveert invoices and have them transformed into a standard JSON? Yes, you can send zoekveert format and have that transformed in JSON. So that means that you want to connect with the zoekveert format. Yeah, you can. So the answer is yes. Any specific questions? So Ralph asked, Belgium invoicing is going introduced on base of four-corner model, which is based on Peppol. Yes, really true. This is why you can reach almost all of your customers via Peppol. This isn't foreseen in Germany. No, true. But the logic, of course, brings that most European countries will turn towards the Peppol network, and most countries will also adopt other networks. One last thing about networks. So at this moment in time, the Peppol network and the DBNA network are not interoperable, but the service providers can function for you as a customer as the switch between the networks. So as long as, for instance, the service providers signs an entity, a company up with their identifier, like a VAT number on both networks, and they make sure that the format conversion happens properly. So like you send to US and you generate 2.3, then the service provider is your switch between the two networks. And that brings extra reach, of course, if you're not able to send and receive via Peppol, but also via the DBNA network. Thomas, yeah. Okay, well, I think we discussed a lot, 40 minutes, and we said maximum 45, so this is perfect. Is it correct we could choose to have different providers for sending and receiving? Absolutely. So the good thing about these open exchange networks being that no matter, or actually depending on where you're situated or what your preferences are, you can opt whichever service provider you want. And as I said, you can have one receiving service provider because that's unique and you have only one S&P entry. And on the sending side, you can even have more service providers that help you with the sending. But for instance, when you want to send and receive, you can do that with one service provider, for instance, with Storecove, but you can also work with two. And within large companies, you mostly experience that sending and receiving, accounts payable, accounts receivable, they're totally different departments, and mostly they don't even know from the other that they are already connected or already working with e-invoicing. Anyone has another question to ask? No. Well, then I think it's good to conclude for today. It was a fruitful webinar. Yeah, so many of you that registered and so many of you that had interest in this subject. Thank you very much for being here. Bianca, thank you very much for being here and yeah, giving this very clear presentation.
Thank you for having me.
You like to add? Yeah.
Thank you for adding me. It was great fun. Good questions.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And yeah, thanks for being here at this late moment on the Friday evening, Friday afternoon. Enjoy your weekend and speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.